Very, very good evening, everyone, or good morning or afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Hannah Hölling, and I'm research professor here at HKB at Bern Academy of the Arts. My warmest welcome to everyone joining us today via Zoom, and warmest welcome to our guest speaker, Joanna Lesnierowska, who will be presenting today. I am greeting you also on behalf of my colleagues, project colleagues, including Andrzej Mirczew, who's just sitting here next to me, Emily Manuel, who is unfortunately on sick leave, although currently probably already on maternity leave, and Charles Rappner, who is our project assistant, as well as Krzysztof Jaworowski, who is behind the technical gear and is supporting us today. So our project team has been generously supported by the Swiss National Science Foundation, the HKB Research Division here at the Department of Materiality in Art and Culture at Bern University of the Arts. We are most grateful. And as you already know, because we had just recently last week our book presentation, the first volume, as you already know, our project, Performance Conservation Materiality Knowledge, explores the possibility and meaning of conserving performance. We research the kind of intersections of performance and conservation as a fascinating opportunity for theoretical and practical investigation. We are looking at performance through the lens of conservation and are asking, right, what is performance and what it might become? What can this new perspective reveal about performance, and what can it teach us about the very conservation? And today I am delighted to introduce Joanna Lesnierowska, who works as a choreographer and visual dramaturge, as well as a member of our research project team, Performance Conservation Materiality Knowledge. So she is not really a new person to the team. And obviously, I don't need to introduce her to many of you. As an independent choreography curator, visual dramaturg, and light and space composer, Joanna was one of the first dance critics in Poland and has written and lectured extensively on Polish choreography, and this she has done internationally. From 2004 to 2020, Joanna was active as a director of the performance program of the ArtStation Foundation in Poznań, which was the first regular dance space and choreographic development center in Poland. During her tenure there, she initiated and led several international collaboration projects. Joanna is also an independent curator who is involved in projects at the National Museum and Nowy Teatr in Warsaw. And her later project that I wanted to mention is Action Cóż, although I am completely aware that I am probably pronouncing it wrongly, a program of choreographic reflection and research at Muzeum Cóż in Engadin, which she ran between 2009 and just last year, 2023. In her recent anthology, Choreography Strategies, co-edited with Marta Kyle in 2021, Joanna surveys the present and anticipates the future of choreographic and performance art. So today, her talk is titled Between Body Memory and Body Present, Reactivating Choreography, and we'll address issues of activation, reactivation, and reactivation of choreography. In her talk, she will address questions such as, what does it mean to reconstruct a performance? And is it possible within such an ephemeral art form at all? Can activation be deployed as an alternative to reconstruction? And what if reactivation, reconstruction, or even restoration, if we might at all use such a term, of an oeuvre becomes impossible due to the scarcity of source materials such as recordings, photographic archives, and testimonies, written or oral? Can a past choreography or performance live on in contemporary practices as a product of recycling and upcycling? And what do those strategies mean within the choreographic practice? So I'm hugely excited about this presentation. And just before I give the screen to Joanna, just very briefly about housekeeping. As you know, this is a lecture, and afterwards, or a presentation afterwards, there will be a possibility to ask questions directly or engage in the Q&A. So you can also share those questions or comments in our chat. We'll be monitoring this. Yeah, if you experience any issues, also please contact us directly or over the chat. Now over to you, Joanna, and welcome again. Very exciting.
Hello, everybody. I am even more excited. I think it's a very great opportunity, and thank you, Hannah, for inviting me to share what actually became, since over 10 years, a big part of my professional life. When I listen to you, it's almost like you made a summary of my talk, but I hope that I can still say something more about and share with you this adventure that actually still continues. And I am going to present now what I have prepared, and you already see the first slide. So it is said that the greatest discoveries are actually made accidentally. And in April 2013, I have traveled to South America for the first time in my life. I wanted to visit Viva Dança Festival in Salvador de Bahia in Brazil and to explore contemporary Brazilian dance. But all the while, from the moment I landed in Brazil, I kept hearing a Polish-sounding surname from the mouth of almost every dance individual I came across. This is how I have learned about Janka Rudzka. Janka Rudzka is a charismatic dancer from Poland who was invited to Salvador de Bahia in the late 1956 by the president of the Federal University of Bahia, Edgar Santos, to open the first dance department in Brazil, dance school at the Federal University of Bahia, working until now, and who combined also in her own choreographic practice modern dance with elements of local Afro-Brazilian culture, in particular music and rituals of the African spirit possession cult known as candomblé. Rudzka's then revolutionary, controversial, and consistently implemented conviction that contemporary culture could not develop without in-depth knowledge of local traditions brought her recognition and enshrined her in the artistic avant-garde pantheon, the Salvadorian pantheon, however, to be more precise, since no one ever heard of Janka Rudzka in Poland back then. Learning that somewhere across the ocean, at a time when contemporary dance had no chance to evolve under communist rule, and in the light of Polish dance community constantly missing a lot of information about their own history and craving for the seminal role models, to learn that our compatriot not only spread a dance and educational revolution, but from every indication was also an intriguing artist, way ahead of her era, made an incredible material for the project. So thus I have decided to trace back Rudzka's personal story and analyze her body of work, and by disseminating knowledge about her oeuvre, to symbolically reclaim Rudzka for a history of Polish dance. This is how the Janka Rudzka project came to life and inspired a huge research run at first by living in Salvador theater anthropologist Dr. Maciej Rożalski, and also bringing in 2017 to Poland Janka Rudzka's biographer, Professor Maria Claudia Guimares from Sao Paulo, who went through archives in Janka home city of Łódź and made a lot of further discoveries. We also have created 2 dance productions joining Polish and Brazilian contemporary dance artists in 2016, and then also Armenian and Georgian ones in 2018, both being a report from the meeting in choreographic practice and in between our dance cultures, inspired by Rudzka artistic gestures and ideas. And there is actually the third work also on its way, hopefully to be realized in 2025, and I will mention it, of course, to you later. So it seems only natural for an artistic research and plan predicated on the discovery of the figure and body of work of a late fast choreographer, to be situated in the field of dance archaeology. And by dance archaeology, I refer here to a very interesting moment in the beginning of the 21st century, in the first decade of the 21st century, where in the field of choreography, we have witnessed a noticeable tendency to return to the history of choreography. This has been accompanied by many reconstructions and discussions on performance documentation. American critic and art historian Hal Foster has dubbed this moment and movement the archival turn, or the archival impulse. And it was directly after Marina Abramovich reconstructed in 2005 her seminal performances of 60s and 70s, what has been followed by her famous and sometimes infamous retrospective exhibition Art is Present. Foster interpreted the reconstructive impulse among artists as a need to form ties with history and to bond with the past. What's interesting, especially German-speaking artists were particularly keen on returning to early 20th century German expressionist dance, Ausdruckstanz. In fact, repeating another gesture and following footsteps of the other generation, the earlier generation of artists in the 70s, the ones that has actually established a Tanztheater form as we know it canonically of today. The practice of dance archaeology thus, being always attached to some remnants of a concrete works, let's say the fossils of them, in fact ventures a step beyond reconstruction. Its principle is to provide a critical overview of the reconstructed piece, but mostly to establish a dialogue between the past and the present. However, in the case of Janka Rudzka's work, the reconstruction seemed close to impossible. And this is mostly due to the scarcity of source materials. In the view of the lack of recordings and testimonies in local press, which is understandable given the circumstances of the era, the end of 50s, we were only in possession of several accounts from the few living witnesses and a modest private photo archive of Silvio Robato, and you look now exactly at the portrait of Janka done by Silvio Robato. And we became actually in possession of this archive only because Silvio, by the time as a young and inspiring architect, fell in love with one of the dancers of Janka Rudzka company and followed the company wherever it performed, and that way became close and documented several moments. And we have actually all the pictures that you're gonna see today, archival pictures, are coming from this very private archive that I was given access to by Leah Robato. So we were only in possession of those modest private photo archive, and which, apart from some portraits and pictures of Janka surrounded by her students, here is also another portrait, and now Janka with her students, and Leah Robato, the lady that Silvio fell in love, is right in front, sitting on the left on the floor next to Janka Rudzka. Another picture also shows most probably the same rehearsal, the same moment. Janka Rudzka presenting to her students a certain moves. So probably from the studio, from the class, or from the rehearsal of a sort. And then also we are in the possession of very few photographs from a solo performance of her called Ex Votos, that she performed herself, which was not a very often case when she was in Salvador. And probably this any reconstruction of choreography from, there is in between the brackets, I put it especially like between several moves, even though please take into consideration that this is my order, and I could imagine, and we all could imagine, several different combinations that would probably affect in several different dances. And then this is a group version of the same performance, this time from stage, Ex Votos by Janka Rudzka, and the next one is actually a work directly inspired by Candomblé and titled Candomblé. And these are one of the very few photos we have from the works of Janka Rudzka. An attempt then to interpret Ruska's choreographies on the basis of a handful of aesthetic photos, most likely also taken not during the show, but especially for the purpose of documentation, that photos merely represent motionless statesque dancers, that would in all probability be more akin to confabulation than reconstruction. In the best case, a speculation. However, I did not went this way. And here, let me confess that reconstruction nor speculation on possible shape of concrete performances of Rutka was never my true interest. And it's not due to the difficulty of the task. That would actually be even more triggering, as I am actually very much into difficulties working in the field of dance and choreography. It was actually more because following dance archaeology movement at the first decade of 2000 and witnessing many as faithful as possible reconstruction of some historical works, I could hardly remember any that would make a real impression on me. In majority of cases, an experience of watching reconstructed historical work is in my also body memory, attached more to a feeling of disappointment and of even further distancing myself from the work. And in fact, they made me always question the very sense of reconstructing or ways of reconstructing that reconstructed of that what once obviously must have been moving audiences. I do believe, and I also know and believe I'm not alone in that conviction, that performances belong to and live in a very concrete moment. And by moment, I mean both their own historical time, as well as the moment of encounter with their audience. Therefore, the one reconstruction does not take into consideration a present moment of audiences watching the work. That does not really give much of a justice to an original event. Performance happens and fulfills itself in a space in between stage and auditorium. And by in between, I understand both a space and a movement. Movement of thought, movement of associations, but also movement of bodies, especially if we apply references to kinesthesia that we now know for sure does exist. So as such, performance is always an exchange and lives in that very exchange, in the back and forth movement of communication between artist and its audience. Communication that is different with every evening, of every next presentation of performance, as there is as many responses as many people encountering the work and responding to it. Thus, I believe reconstructing the original shape of performances, if at all truly possible, does not make the work simply alive again. Other procedures, other than pure excavating fossils and trying to put together found broken pieces into some ideal imagined whole, other procedures and other in-depth investigations seems to me necessary to truly recreate, not reconstruct the performance in its complexity. It requires, I believe, first of all, recognition and then recreation in present time, the conditions that made possible the movement in between audience and stage. To me, it means, in fact, questioning and researching not only the very work, its aesthetics, its dramaturgy, possible solutions of transitions, but as well and equally relevant is its very context of performance creation, presentation, the context that can be then translated to be presented for contemporary audience. And that means, in fact, to study the past performance reception and perception rather than just the shapes we can recognize from the pictures. And first of all, to question how performance was, and if possible, is still remembered. Because from the very outset of my project in Salvador, I had the awareness, which deepened with each subsequent talk discovering Janka, that when looking for the traces of her life and oeuvre, we were confronted not only with the lack of established facts, but also with the space of collective memory, imperfect, fragmentary, and rich in strongly emotional images and several, often mutually contradictory scenarios of Janka's story. This should not come as a surprise, given that she shot through Salvador like a comet, She only spent in the city 3 years, invited in 56 and already living in 59. Dazzling, exotic, elusive, and obviously misunderstood since she was allowed to leave so soon. And yet, despite her undeniably star-like, diva-like, theatrically extrovert persona, her enchanting and abashic behavior and looks, as reported by the people who still remember her alive, Rudzka also proved to be an extremely secretive individual that ostentatiously concealed her likely traumatic Polish wartime past. Because Janka's ambiguous figure, full of undertones and near protean, was largely her own conscious creation. Suffices to say that she performed under a multitude of names, therefore identities, both prior to and after her departure from Poland. And it is mostly through the research of Professor Maria Claudia Guimares and her study in Poland that we have learned, for example, that we don't know an exact date of birth of Janka Rudzka. So she might have been born as well in 1916 in January, as she claimed officially, or in 1916, but in August, as it sometimes happens in different descriptions. But according to the birth certificates that Professor Guimares has found in Łódź in Poland in 2017, she has been born in 1910 as a daughter of Henryk Zandel, before named Haskiel, so definitely in the Jewish family. However, the still living witnesses and accomplices of her life remember her introducing herself as a Catholic. So the fact that she has concealed her Jewish origins, that we have proven them, brings also a very interesting twist to her whole history. And the fact that she is known both as Janka Zandel, Janina Zandel-Rudzka, after her husband that nobody ever actually seen, Jana Rudzka or Juana del Zandel-Rudzka in the times when she was visiting Argentina. It also all makes the story of Janka almost like a perfect scenario for a Hollywood movie, incorporating also quite known examples of the Jewish community members fleeing Europe before, during, and after the Second World War. So all that very effectively redirected my attention from particular choreographic pieces towards Rudzka's history and her complicated identity, both on stage and in real life. It was also fascinating to notice the degree of influence which she had exerted on others and the way how she still lives in their memory and how she entered the Bahian dance pantheon as one of the relevant ancestors. So in this respect, our investigations was invaluably bolstered by the information, including corporeal information, received from the charismatic soloist of Janka, Lia Robato. Lia Robato has become a successful choreographer herself. Not only she married Silvia Robato, that actually provided us also with a documentation of her work extensively, but we are not going to talk about it at this very moment. But anyway, Lia Robato and her career has been largely formed by her meeting and collaboration with Janka Rudzka. The story is contributed by Lia, who was entrusted to Janka already back in Sao Paulo, and she was back then only in the age of 12, and then moved with Janka to Salvador and never left. The stories Lia contributed were a mix of facts and scraps of memory that had been strongly distorted, emotionally tinged over time, filtered and conceptualized years later by Lia, the mature woman and choreographer herself. And the stories painted an intriguing picture of Rudzka as an uncompromising avant-garde artist who was ahead of her era and who now seems as her most inspiring, timely, and resonant with contemporary choreographic practice, not so much at the level of particular pieces, which, as we have seen, were far removed from today's aesthetics, what we could witness. It was more about her artistic conviction and creative strategies. The latter occurred also much more significant, not only to our project in Salvador, but also in the broader context, reclaiming Janka for Poland's choreography, a field that still needs to embrace many white spots in its history and long suffered from the acute lack of immutable strategies and inspirational historical role models. I am personally very happy and proud that in effect of our research, Janka Rudzka has been reintroduced to Poland, and next to 3 other amazing avant-garde Polish female artists, Pola Nireńska, Bronisława Niżyńska, and Marie Rambert, she has been featured in a book edited by Joanna Lesnierowska, published in 2017 by Music and Dance Institute in Warsaw. You are now looking at the cover. It's a bilingual publication in which we managed to introduce 2 texts on Janka Rudzka. One is a biographical text by Professor Guimares, and second is my report from the first years of the project dedicated to my work about Janka and her choreographies. However, it is the moment in which I need to make another important reservation. Discovering more and more details concerning Janka's very complex story made me aware that referring to her as a Polish choreographer may be a bit problematic. Born in Poland, in Łódź, Janka has received her dance education in Janina Mieczyńska School in Warsaw. And the school was based on the rhythmic of Jacques Dalcroze and embedded in tradition of German expressionism. But in fact, Janka's maturation as an artist, maturation as choreographer took place mostly abroad and in dialogue with non-Polish culture. So in this context, Janka Rudzka has been important mainly for the development of the Brazilian and particularly Bahian dance scene. Hence, it would be more appropriate to refer to her not as a Polish artist, but rather a Polish-born artist, all the more so due to her migrations, both literal and metaphorical, as Janka did not want to maintain relations with Poland. And obviously, until 2013, she was very successful in making sure that her home country is not following her career. Thus, our project, in desire to reclaim her for Polish dance, was also heavily burdened with a danger of rather appropriating her, even though with no ill intentions, under the narrative about once lost and now miraculously found heroine of Polish choreography. And since honestly the first impulse of mine was the desire to symbolically bring Janka home, unfortunately, as it later occurred to me, acting on such an impulse was directly against her expressed will. Lia Robato has actually told me she was always repeating a line when asked about her home country: "Do not ask me about Poland, I will never return there." And knowing also about how she concealed her Jewish origins and the fact that in between 1940 and 45, Maria Claudia Guimares couldn't find any trace of what was happening to Janka during the war, we can assume that there is a traumatic history connected to the Second World War that she wanted to run away from, and maybe that was also an impulse of a great wound. I read it as a wound that made her cut her ties with the country. Even when in 1965 she came back to Europe, she established herself in Austrian Graz, where till her last days she was teaching in a theater school movement for actors. And she never came back also when in Europe to making choreographies, to creation. She also refused to talk. Professor Guimares recalls then when writing her master thesis on Janka's life, she went to Graz to meet with Janka and talk to her in person. Janka did not let her into the apartment for the 3 consecutive days, knowing that she came all the way from Sao Paulo. And finally, she agreed to meet her. And even then, for most of the questions, she was saying, "It's too private, I don't want to talk about it." So not only Lia Robato, but also other witnesses were reporting how she did not want to talk about Poland. And then I felt very conflicted with continuing my project at a certain point because I was very bothered by the fact that she is not able to protest against it since she died in 2008, 5 years before I made my discovery. So I hope that for bringing her home, I will be forgiven. And actually, Lia Robato is assuring me that Janka probably would love the fact that she finally made it home and is recognizable in Poland. Gaining more and more multiple insights into Janka Rudzka's story, I started to be more and more intrigued by, and at the same time resonating with her artistic ideas and creative strategies. Thus, I found a way how her work can move me, how we can find a movement between us. The project more and more became then led by the burning desire of repetition of Janka Rudzka gestures, both the literal gesture of a journey from Poland to a remote country, from a familiar culture to one that was perceived as alien, even exotic, along with the question of the possibility of intercultural meeting and understanding, as well as Janka's programmatic artistic gesture of humble studies of non-stylized traditional culture and its local sources, along with the question of its potential significance for contemporary choreographic practice. And this is exactly with this desire in heart and mind when the notion and practice of reactivation came into play. Basic dictionary definition of reactivation point out to an act of making something active again and again and again, and or of causing something to function after a period of suspension. The notion of reactivation then I am bringing up here is in fact rooted in a simple understanding that every action causes a reaction. So in fact, to be once active means to be able to cause a reaction. To function means to operate successfully, to be successful in intended effect, thus to have an impact, to produce, to create something that is following the action, be it a particular product in context of a performance then, be it a desired resonance, trigger a response, be it moving also emotionally and engaging in the movement, engaging audience in the movement. In that sense, every gesture is also both an action itself and at the same time is pregnant with another action in response. So executed with an intention of an effect. The past, so for a while suspended, thus temporary inactive gestures then, are equipped always with a creative potential. And when consciously and carefully reactivated, they trigger further movement, that of bodies, that of minds, of thoughts, and such they can maintain being active, maintain its liveness. They are able to provoke responses and reflections, even if in a new transformed form, they make a performance simply to live on. They can make the gesture creative, active, and alive again, and thus they can make it also survive. Taking this conviction and understanding as a departure point for my project, I have engaged in a series of reactivations of Janka Rudzka artistic and creative gestures. Together with a team of Polish and Brazilian artists, we have started from the gestures of repetitions, keeping in mind that every repetition is at the same time, by its very nature, burdened with differences. So we gave ourselves freedom to develop them, to go initiate a gesture and then go beyond the gesture. It was also inspired by the idea of repetition as non-mnemotechnique, believing that to repeat means also to learn by heart and to remember and make remembered. Reactivation of Janka Rudzka's first gesture of traveling to distance culture asked for humble and respectful turn towards the oft ignored and frequently depreciated authentic, non-stylized traditional culture. In our case, it was a step into the true unknown. Because of many contemporary dancers, regardless of latitude, the notion of authentic traditional dance culture, opposed to the folklore dance highly stylized that we learn at dance schools, remains a terra incognita. much like a separate continent whose inhabitants communicate in a foreign, incomprehensible, and archaic language, incompatible with present-day reality. The main question we took from Rudzka was whether, and if so, then in what ways the traditional culture can nourish today's contemporary choreographic practice. And this question is founded on the conviction that the stereotypical antagonism between the traditional and the modern, between what is dead and relegated to the past, and what is alive and assigned to the present, and thus capable of effectively accounting for us and the world that surrounds us, has no place in reality. In order to hammer this conviction into certainty, we resolved to take the second step, which Janka was unable to make, and perhaps also reluctant, under the circumstances of her era. Repeating her deeply analytical gesture of distance observation, we strove to more fully immerse in traditional culture and study it as its very source and its practice. So as a part of preparations for the project in November 2015, I paid a study to visit Salvador de Bahia with choreographer Janusz Orlik and the dancer Agnieszka Kryst, in the course of which we decided to stop by at the neighboring region of Reconcavo, the cradle of traditional samba. It was there in the small towns of Santo Amaro and Cachoeira that we met with nearly 80-year-old women samba masters to soak in the samba at its purest and experience complete immersion in a living samba culture, an immersion devoid of any instructions as to how to swim in its water. Having returned to Salvador, we began also a focused analysis supervised by the dancer Isis Carla, who specializes in teaching those with no prior experience with traditional dance. As in the case with a foreign language course, we began with grammar and basic vocabulary, dissecting the samba body and deconstructing samba choreographies in order to use basic components to construct our own words, larger sentences, and eventually entire stories. At the same time, the experience of complete immersion in the samba, an immersion that largely overwhelmed us and transcended our European and formally educated dancing bodies. You can actually see here Janusz Orlik trying to dance samba on his tiptoes, which is completely wrong because he's actually trying to learn samba du pied, samba du foot, and he should slide foots on the floor. So it was really very challenging for us. This immersive experience, followed by an extensive choreographic analysis, occurred to us as a metaphor of the ways in which Janka must have experienced Salvador and practiced her choreography. We decided then to follow this trail, and upon returning to our home country, apply a similar method in studying Polish dances. And we know also our Brazilian friends did the same. Thanks to the collaboration with the great traditional dances pedagogue Piotr Zgorzelski, not only did we end up dancing the mazurkas and oberek for the first time and learned how to teach them to our Brazilian colleagues, which is actually, in fact, learning the methodology of teaching a foreign language. But we also ventured into the territory of ethnochorological research, discovering many patent differences and fascinating similarities between traditional dances from Poland, Brazil, but also from many different geographical regions. The comprehensive multidimensional analysis of global traditional dance culture, conducted from an ethnochorological standpoint, equipped us with the tools and courage to juxtapose such ostensibly remote dance worlds as the Brazilian ritual samba and the Polish oberek. It what turned out to be our next reactivations, that of creative strategies of Janka Rudzka. Our beloved guide was Lia Robato, who throughout Janka's Salvador period remained her student, faithful assistant, favorite soloist, as well as her protege, and at times also her guardian, and direct, albeit reflexive, artistic hierarchs. The discoveries we have made learning from her were guiding us and defining the creative process, leading to the premiere of the first work in the series, in the Janka Rudzka project series, premiered in 2016. So as you see, Lia was generously not only to share her memories, but also to teach us lessons according what she remembered Janka was teaching her. And thanks to that, we had an opportunity to experience and put into our bodies a lot of information and learn a very basic elements of the dance belief system of Janka Rudzka. So Janka has distanced herself from expressionism, in particular its exaggerated variants, even though she had been educated in this very spirit back in Poland, in between the words. She subscribed rather to expression, and we must suspect that it's more the American modern dance, and especially what comes to mind, or who comes to mind, is Martha Graham, as might be evidenced by the pictures we saw and aesthetics immortalized in the preserved photographs. Although we don't have any proofs that Janka was in direct contact with the American artists or have ever seen any of the choreographies of Graham. Rudzka also opposed virtuosity and formalized technique and preferred a free flow of energy, grounding her course in improvisation fed with poetic imagery, not to be confused with the stage improvisation as a performance. From what she was actually asking for was she was asking her students for emotions and striving towards dance from the inside towards the outside as a metaphor of human condition. And most of all, she craved for the space that would be appropriated by dance and organized by every move. She looked for spatiality in each gesture and in the whole human body. That also makes me think about Martha Graham and the studies inspired by his father, who was a doctor. Janka was also fascinated by other fields of art, in particular music, poetry, and sculpture as a three-dimensional and spatial form. And in her view, inspiration did not equal imitation. The works of others were an impulse for reflection, a subject of in-depth analysis, and thus Rudzka contemplated how other fields of art could nourish choreography, provide it with compositional solutions, how their tools and philosophies could be applied in working with the human body. And the goal was invariably a transcription and transposition rather than faithful reproduction and imitation. So today we would definitely say it was a creative translation into dance and a search for new qualities. Let's look again at those photographs from Rudzka's performances directly inspired by Candomblé. As you see, they are perfectly devoid of local folklore and stereotypical folk staffage. They are completely free from exotism in favor of an aesthetic geometric composition, resembling almost an ideally Apollonian reliefs. Evidently fascinated by and respectful of ritual, Janka studied its formal structure from a distance, asking about its essence, searching for an archetypical gesture and its poetic representation. And it is worth mentioning here also that in his own investigations on Janka Rudzka, Maciej Rożalski, the theater anthropologist collaborating with us, claimed that she has consciously applied anthropological tools, as she must have been aware of development of anthropological research while her formation times in Poland, when the whole world followed expeditions and discoveries of seminal researchers of these times, Bronisław Malinowski. At the same time, she was artistically independent and courageous in her experiments, maneuvering with the context and juxtaposing seemingly foreign worlds and languages, never shunning artistic risks and invariably trusting her intuition, and thus remaining faithful to herself. And I must say that this is exactly this Janka that seems to me the most ahead of her times. And especially I have resonated with her ideas, especially also when we think and remember that the theory of translation underwent a relevant shift in perspective more than a decade after Janka was coining her creative strategies in Salvador. And let me here mention another inspiring ideas coined in a text by seminal contemporary dance dramaturge Kuls. In his article, Dance, a Translating Art of 2001, he defines the act of translation as the basis of any creative process where artists translate sources that inspire them onto their own target language, own medium. Kuls points out how until mid-20th century, the translation theory was still attached to and occupied by the notion of faithfulness to original. and how only in second half of 20th century, under influence of such thinkers as Walter Benjamin, and he mentioned the task of translator from 1923, and Jacques Derrida, and especially his work text Living On, published only in 1979, priorities in translation theory were reversed. The translation gained first and foremost a function within the target language. And the task of translator then is since understood as to expand and deepen his language by means of the foreign language. Further, Kuhls argues that it is only through the translation that the original can survive, can live on. What's to me especially important if we assume that translation might be also understood as another act of reactivation. Kuhls says then that translation, so activation, reactivation, also well, is first and foremost a creative act, which offers the target language the potential of renewal or at least evolution. And what is true to a textual translation can easily be extended to any form of creative activity. He sees dance as a privileged side of translation. In fact, we might describe dance as a sort of simultaneous translation, much like language interpretation. And then he points out, for example, that in French, dancers are also referred to as interpreters, just like musicians, actors, and the verbal translators. A conscious reapplication of Rudzka's senses and creative strategies became another repetition of her gestures and led us through the whole creative process of original piece, culminating the project in 2016. As for Rudzka herself, her figure signposted our journey and served as a spiritual patron of sorts, inspiring and legitimizing our brave explorations of traditional culture, not so much understood as a goal in itself, but rather as a rich repertoire of motifs and gestures translated into our own artistic language. Thus, Janka's translational strategy, which was so far a process to the final ahead of his time, emboldened us to experiment and enabled us to put forward the creative process to the final performance product, directing our attention towards searching for a stage form that would faithfully render the nature of our meeting in practice. Premiere of the show, entitled Livening at Festival Viva Danza in Salvador, followed from a 3-week artistic residency that used choreographic explorations to bring together Polish and Brazilian dance artists in April 2016. The paramount goal of the project was to tighten the relations between the two communities and establish artistic dialogue under the patronage of Rudzka, who in the late 50s symbolically bridged our two dance worlds. While pondering over the possibility of intercultural meeting in practice, we also practiced the art of meeting itself. Following Janka's programmatic artistic turn towards non-stylized traditional culture, we adapted our non-stylized dances as a point of departure. I mean here samba jupe, samba de foot, danced mostly in a single as samba giroda, and the spinning and thus potentially trance-inducing Polish dance oberek. We approached them as subjects of a respectful, comprehensive analysis, as well as distance reconstruction and reconstruction in a new jointly created context. Traditional culture that we gradually learned when offering one another a mirror to look into our own traditions became a space for dialogue and freedom, a type of primeval sea in which we immersed ourselves and from which we recovered the most inspiring and meaningful particles, something like cultural sense. Confronted with who we are today and with our artistic fascination and research, those themes enabled us to establish a platform for an actual meeting in practice, in a peculiar space between us, or to refer to Homi Bhabha idea, in an artistic third place. Especially supportive to the core of our process turned out to be the thought of the French philosopher and psychoanalyst Daniel Sibony, who in his book Le Corps et sa Danse in 1995 defines dance as a movement in between two bodies: body memory, corps mémoire, and body present, corps actuel. The passageway from one to another, which always takes place in both directions at the same time, is an act of appeal, calling out to the present, and rappel, recalling to the past. conceptualizing dance as a movement between what is encoded in the body by means of individual and collective tradition on the one hand, and its continuous update in the present time and bodies, consecutive with being in the past time and being in present here and now, effectively nullifies the opposition between the traditional and the present, which, let me remind you, was also a belief of Janka Rudzka. And even further and even more, in this line of thinking, every single performance recreates its creation, does its own history, in front of an audience, so is an ongoing oscillation between body memory and body present. Similarly, in working on our project with Polish and Brazilian dancers, we established both the dialogue between our traditions as well as the exchange of our own individual movement practices and their mutual information as the principle of our meeting. This exchange determined the first week of our residency, which we spent in a state of deep concentration, far from the tumult of Salvador, in a town of Cachoeira in the region of Reconcavo, where a few months earlier we had been initiated into the samba. It was here that in the course of living together and cooking Brazilian and Polish dishes, we learned one another and from one another, not just the oberek or the samba in its numerous variants, but also the dances of candomblé deities orishas, as well as the capoeira, somatic methods of working with the body, and mostly individual, often auteur strategies of generating movement and composition. At that point, we also established the crucial practice of conversation, regular reports on movement-related experiences, in-depth reflections, analyses, and discussions, leading to the formulation of questions and decisions that were key to us in our work. Rather than pure knowledge, our focal point was to understand who we were, where we come from, how different and similar we were in our hybrid identities as humans and as artists. This extraordinary practice of dialoguing, whose nature implies openness to the other and the necessity to ability to listen to one another, to attentively listen to own stories and the stories of others, led us to establish improvisation as our chief working strategy. Improvisation favored also in studio by Rudzka. However, in our case, we also understood it as a practice that more than any other requires attentive listening, a continuous practice of attentiveness, and by that fosters creative integration and transformation of data collected here and now in real time and body. The starting point for our improvisation sessions was the traditional concept of the spinning body that was present in both of the analyzed traditions, as well as concepts of the body that pulsates with energy, the body that is in dialogue with rhythm, the vibrating body, the body that accumulates energy, also together with other bodies, the body partaking in harmony, which is a particularly oberek inherent concept, the levitating body floating in a swirl above the ground, the body that is off balance, the samba concept of desequilibrio was here crucial, the body that experienced a sudden shift in weight energy, bahavento, which is a moment from samba de caboclo, exactly the moment when orisha enters the body of a person dancing, impersonating the orisha. The body, and finally, the body in search of elemental qualities deposited within wind, fire, water, as represented also by specific orishas, but also all over the world and their characteristic gestures. And last but not least, the polyphonic body that contains a multitude of coexisting voices, the body that tries to communicate through them. In this context, our exploration of the body relied heavily on the very own practice of mine, a dance language that I have been developing with a colleague, choreographer Janusz Orlik, since 2014. It is the practice we call noise in the body, a method of improvisation based on a search for physical representations of corporeal polyphony and cacophony, a special body language which eventually shared by all members of the artistic team served as the third language, as Baba wants space of freedom, of liberation. Polyphonic, by definition, it remained open to all the voices and languages inscribed in our body's memories, those individuated and those borrowed from contemporary contemporary culture and dance education, as well as those we reactivated from our traditional culture, serving as a physical metaphor and way of questioning of our hybrid identity and painting a body struggling simultaneously with these voices in excess, in noise, cacophony, from inside out, exactly as one of Janka's main dancing principles was. The fact that consciously the project has been dedicated to professional contemporary dancers whose knowledge of their own traditional culture tends to be rather superficial and often distorted by formal education, as it was also in the case of me until recently. That fact made us all become equal in the face of our ignorance of our own dance roots and embarked us on a journey guided by the same question. Where do we come from? What does our dance tradition entail? What narratives, what values, what formal elements that can potentially inspire contemporary choreographic practice? All artists in the project were choreographers and teacher dance activists themselves, because we wanted a meeting based on a partnership whose resonance would extend beyond a one-off presentation. And that goal was reflected in the title and verses accompanying of our project. Here you see a little bit of contemporary practices we were shared. And in the next slide, you see the poster of the performance we made together and the only text that was accompanying the performance. As you also see, the leavening nomen omen in the looking for a Portuguese version of the title, for lack of an adequate counterpart, we went with the word semente, which denotes semen, seeds. We want to believe that what we sowed will bear fruit elsewhere in the future, generating in ourselves and in our dance communities, as well as many other unexpected moments and locations. I wanted also to point out that the practice of translation has led the creation of the performance on all its levels. Here you see that the poster is inspired by the mosaic of the very important visual artist Bel Borba, who filled Salvador completely with the mosaic and mosaic birds like that. And that we also transposed. Can I have another, please? We transposed also into the setup, the light design of the performance, also representing flying birds. And as you also see, the pictures I'm presenting you now from the premiere of the performance, similar to Janka's candomblé work, also did not went into any exotism nor any ritual of reconstructions. We stayed faithful to our own contemporary aesthetics and translated elements of our traditional dance culture in the way it enriched our own work, own choreographic practices, and own understanding of it. As you see here, these are the more previous pictures were mine working pictures. This is the pictures from the very premiere. And on the next one, you see the whole team of 9 dancers working on this performance. The imperative of this journey we embarked on and its undeniable value was, in fact, the meeting through practice and meeting practice in the company of my colleagues from Salvador and Poland, which enabled us to comprehensively explore, understand, and confront with the unknown foreign culture. But the process turned out also into a unique meeting with one's own tradition, perceived and experienced through the eyes and bodies of the other, and as such became a surprising discovery of our own culture for our own also choreographic practice. And the practice of translation and transmission of the outcome of this project became almost inherent to it since the beginning. These pictures you see now are actually from the performance we did 1 year later in Poland, where many of our dancers from both from Poland and Brazil could not join us. So we had to introduce to our research and vocabulary and our third language and traditional languages, other dancers. So the transmission of the material, body-to-body knowledge transmission was necessary already on the moment of the first revival of the piece in bringing it to Poland, as well as, and this is the names of the Polish and Brazilian team dancing in the Poznań performances. As you see also, the set of the performance has changed. We dropped the idea of the lights and we actually recreated a traditional terreiro ceiling, a candomblé, a place where rituals are taking place. In 2018, we have been invited to continue our research, and the next slide will show you the poster of the work Polyphonias that we did not only between Polish and Brazilian culture, but also inviting Caucasus artists to a dialoguing with there and with all our traditions. And here is the team of people from Georgia, Armenia, Poland, and Brazil that worked on this performance, that tour extensively to Armenia, Georgia, but also to Belarus and Ukraine, which actually today seems almost like in a different life and on a different planet. And the trip of mine continues, as here you see Lia Robato on a Zoom call with myself and Nemias Santana, one of the artists involved in the first two works. A Zoom we made with her in January in preparation for a third work that is on its way, dedicated to Janka Rudzka and her legacy. And this time, we are going actually to ask Lia Robato to dance for us and for the camera what she does remember from dancing with Janka, taking her classes. And as you see already here, some of the first materials are revealing the etymology of a certain vocabulary and gestures of Janka herself. And I am thrilled to maybe next time report to you on the outcome of this very special work, knowing that Lia Robato is nowadays 84 years old and still amazingly clear in her mind and lucky enough healthy to collaborate with us. So I am actually 2 days ahead, another flight to Salvador de Bahia to work with her on this new third iteration that hopefully will come in full shape in 2025. And thank you for listening. That would be for a moment the report that I wanted to share with you about how instead of reconstructing, I actually dedicate myself and continue to dedicate myself to a notion of reactivation of choreographic gestures and materials. And I think I'm quite good on time. I'm very proud of myself because I love to talk a lot and I can talk hours about these adventures. I would be happy to answer any of your questions and as well maybe share insights from the current project I am very busy with now, which also in a very interesting way resonates with the practices I have discovered when researching Janka Rudzka and in a way discovered also as mine, the ones that connect me with these symbolic ancestors of mine.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and please everyone join me in clapping our hands digitally to Joanna, and really, yeah, wonderful, really insightful talk. We have learned such a great deal, Joanna, about your practice, about Janka Rudzka, and much more. I would say perhaps now, yes, because we are a small round, perhaps everyone could just jump on the screen. We have already turned on the images. We have already, I think, one question already in the chat, which we'll take shortly. Perhaps if Krzysztof, our technical support, deems this doable, we could just basically invite also people who want to ask questions directly to unmute and ask questions directly and engage in a conversation, Joanna. But could I just take this opportunity and start just by asking one question related to this kind of multiple, I mean, I have tons of questions, and obviously one of them would be, you know, to relate this wonderful notions that that you brought up also to your own artistic practice, to kind of rethinking your own artistic projects. And I think it's related, you know, to my first kind of idea about asking you about the specific notions of time. I believe that, you know, underpinned your topic, your talk. There were multiple temporalities, you know, that run through this talk. So interestingly, and I also not only mean the fact that, you know, Rudzka, as you said, was very inventive about her birth date, right? But in your quotation, you know, of Daniel Sibony's ideas as well, dancing between the two bodies, one remembering, right, and one the present, one
the body memory and body present, yes.
Exactly. They are this multiple times. And then obviously the idea that a body might also be an archive, you know, something that I think came through your talk so wonderfully, and has been theorized by different scholars. So I just wonder, you know, how do you reconcile those two kind of different, perhaps thinking, or perhaps not such different? I would love to hear from you. How do you reconcile those different temporalities? Also in the relation, you know, that one thinks, and I think Sibony said so wonderfully in one of his kind of talks that, you know, dance also takes time, right, in the body, and as the body.
Yeah.
Your ideas of upcycling or recycling that we perhaps might hear also in relation to your own practice. How does this?
Yeah, yeah, thank you, Hannah, for this question. I mean, I must say that even though I research and I am close to this topic already from 2003, I still feel like I am on the beginning of the journey and I'm in the middle of it. And that actually resonates to me a lot with this notion of oscillation between two bodies. For me, coming from a very contemporary milieu of choreography, and in Poznan, when I was still running a venue, we have been a major center of conceptual dance, also in a way, a very avant-garde experimental choreography. So the notion of history and traditional dances, and also even the archaeology of dance, was very foreign emotionally to me. So I was, of course, aware of it. But it was for me incredibly interesting to discover it on my own skin and emotional, let's say, layer, how much certain ideas are inherent in my own understanding and way of thinking about choreography and moving, and how I, coming from such a distance culture, am able to get in connection to, with all the respect and proportion, of course, kept with the energy and the vocabulary, this pan-traditional vocabulary of traditional dances, and to kind of understand that the historical dances can be a guide into naming and coining my own artistic things. But this resonance, this membrane that we become layered by both what we gain through our culture, what we gain through our education, what our body is being taught and learns through own peregrinations, and what we actually discover and develop ourselves, this kind of a constant identity crisis, I would even say body identity crisis, it's for me the most interesting, incredible space in between, about which Sibony also writes. He actually has been writing about this in-between space and movement between these two bodies. So I am actually, in a very certain way, insist on staying in this tremble, let's say, in this oscillation all the time, which is actually what I believe Sibony meant, and what actually researchers of identity, especially the one transferred through dance, also mean. Here, I would also love to always say a word of big gratitude to one of my teachers, and I'm very privileged to call him also my friend, mentioned already, Hikuls, who as a dramaturg has been working with Akram Khan and Sidi Larbi Sherkawi, two European artists of Asian origins, whose practice is also based on a constant dialoguing between culture, between bodies they have acquired on the course of their dance education, and they have inherited through their Asian cultures and roots, and thoughts of Hikuls, and the book he actually has written about the working with Akram Khan and Sidi Larbi Shehkawi were also a source of self-empowerment to me, to grant myself a permission also to, even though encountering a historical figure, to not focus myself and not to dedicate myself only to reconstruction, but actually to really oscillate between what does it mean to me also to encounter Janka, her practices, and the traditional culture, both of Polish dances, which I became total fan of. I'm a very enthusiastic practitioner of oberek and mazurka since then, but also let's say this different traditional dances that in a very core are actually bearing much more similarities than differences, than much more than we would expect at first glance. I don't know if I answer your question, but
Absolutely.
I mean,
we can continue. Obviously, we can, and that will be continued anyway. But just to see that there are also two questions in the chat room, and I bet other people present on the screen will also want to engage. So let me just take first from Claudio. Oh, Claudio is here on the screen with us. Hi, Claudio, great to see you. University of Monterey, is it correct? PhD student. Yes, Claudio, could you pose the question directly if you can unmute? I'm not quite sure if this is possible. Krzysztof? Yes, super.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you also for sharing some issues about this research. And my question is, what would be the role of digital archives or materials in this research?
As I was already mentioning, today we did not have any visual material, moving images documenting the work of Janka Rudzka. I was several times asking Lia Rubato about whether she recalls any of the moments of the any documentation has been shared, but we must remember that we are actually talking about the year end of 50s, where contemporary dance in Salvador, not Rio de Janeiro, not Sao Paulo, but Salvador, has not been as popular and as covered as it might have been in the major dance centers in the different places. So in fact, there is very few testimonies in written, almost no press materials. The only pictures are coming from Silvio Robato because he just fell in love with Lia and followed the company and made this whole archive and shared it with us. So the pictures survived because Lia, his wife, just kept them dearly in her private archives. And unfortunately, Lia, who once made a special performance trying to reconstruct several choreographies of Janka Rudzka, also lost the recording of her own reconstruction. So about digital materials, we were really left with nothing, literally with nothing.
Excellent. We have another question from Josephine Ellis, and I'm seeing her. I don't know, Josie, if you are able to turn on, or if you wish to turn on the mic and ask the question yourself. Otherwise, I can just read it aloud.
Yeah, I can unmute myself. Thank you for your presentation. It was wonderful. I was just wondering if you could speak more to the conceptual differences between the different terms you used. So reconstruction, reactivation, and activation. And I'm probably most interested in this difference between reactivation and activation.
Okay, I mean, just to make a reservation, I'm not a theorist, so everything I'm bringing here is led by my intuition and my practice. So when I speak about reconstruction, as I was mentioning, I refer to the way how within the field of dance archaeology, artists and researchers are busy with excavating fossils, the remnants of existing performances, and trying to reimagine from these bits and pieces, broken pieces, something that once used to be a whole, especially if it's deprived of any information about how the reconstruction has happened, it ends up in something that to me does not really give any particular justice to how the performance really not only looked like, but also what was its very impact on the audience, and therefore how it could be reproduced as impactful in the present contemporary time with the present contemporary audiences. Whenever I think about it, I also always think about the old good model of communication by Roman Jakobson. As you probably remember, he has detected the elements necessary to make any communication successful. And it can be also very interestingly applied to also creative processes and creative products. When I teach dramaturgy and work with artists, I usually bring this as a kind of a testing model, whether we as makers are actually achieving a successful communication when doing a work. And one of the major things, major elements that are necessary beside addressee, addresser, and message, which is in case of young artists also not always a given, the clear message. What is necessary is communication, is establishing contact, code, and context being established. And in reconstruction, I often have a feeling that as a live event, it misses establishing context and contact and defining the common code actually that is necessary to convey successfully the very complex essence of the phenomenon which performance work is. And when I speak about activation and reactivation, I mean, for me, difference is simple. Activate something is to make something work. Reactivate is to make something work again. So in the context of performance preservation, and dropping an idea or distancing myself from the desire and ideas and strategies of reconstruction, I favor an idea of reactivation, which actually, as I was trying to share, for me, it's always looking for recreation of conditions in which the work of art can be functioning again, because as I was mentioning, the basic definition of reactivation is actually making something work again after the period of suspension, or making something function again, which means being successful in some function, yeah, like working, just simply working. We often very directly, after seeing performances, the so-called normal audience often says, this performance did me something, it worked on me, it works for me. So in this way, a successful performance is achieving a certain movement, activates the spectator, the audience, is actually triggering a reaction. And I think that reconstruction, like being just a presentation of the pieces and fossils brought together in speculating on how the original form of the performance could look like, reactivation is actually offering the space of exchange between audience and the artist, the performance itself, and creates what actually Sibony also calls this space of in-between, space of movement, also between movement of thoughts, of ideas, and of bodies, if we take into consideration kinesthesia, for example, this unconscious movement that looking at dance is actually triggering in our bodies on very cellular, often not only muscular level. I hope I got any closer to this.
No, that was great. Thank you so much.
I'll just jump in really quick. Thanks, Joanna, and lovely to hear you referencing Guy Paul's work. A fan of his as well. And I don't have so much a question, but just carrying on from what you were just sharing and the importance of language. You know, again, thinking about Yvonne Rayner's work and her not using the word translation, but transmission. And I can't speak for her, but I have a sense that translation offers too much slippage in a way, because translating can have a lot of, it can be flawed. And transmission, if you think of radio transmitting, it attempts a more direct transmission of. So I just almost the opposite, although I'm a fan of your presentation in terms of reactivation rather than reconstruction. It's just interesting to think about different artists and language and what feels more precise versus what allows for different hybrid forms or a slippage of some kind, which happens naturally, I think. But I think there's this attempt with transmission feels more fixed or precise than translation. That's my interpretation.
Thank you, Sarah, for this remark. However, I must say that I have an intuition that I hope to investigate further in my practice. And actually, I am in the middle of one of the projects that is tackling this at the moment. I have a feeling that every transmission is also a form of translation. Because at the moment I am actually reactivating or getting back to my own choreography from 2014. I have been commissioned to or asked by my colleagues from Krakow Choreographic Center to put on them or revive a choreography and transmit it to the new bodies. So in effect, choreography that was entirely built on this language of mine called noise in the body is actually, to a certain degree at the moment, a classical example of transmission of the material from body that used to dance it to the body that is going to dance it, but also why I call it a language, because actually by the act of transmitting and translating it to the new physicality and emotionality, the language itself is evolving and developing further. So in fact, I'm laughing that my desire is to infect Polish dance language with as many possible interpreters of noise in the body as possible, to enlarge it and keep developing it with every next person that is entering the practice of it. But I do really also feel that in this regard, Hannah was already mentioning how interesting concepts they are also kind of sexy when we think about ecology of dance and performance preservation in context of sustainability and as a notion of care. Are the terms I am actually extremely excited now at the moment is the notion of recycling of choreographic materials and upcycling of choreographic materials. Coming directly from the language vocabulary of ecology, recycling, of course, is actually taking what have been already created and being recreating it or changing, transforming it into a new material. And as much as this actually belongs to all the vast field of post-choreography, which believes that everything that has happened in our field is actually a big pool of gestures, steps, ideas, and possibilities that we can juggle with and recreate, recycle according to our will. Of course, then we probably can engage in a lot of questioning, is it so and how, and what is the ethics also of this post-choreographic movement. But when it comes to upcycling, this is definitely a term very inspiring to me, which actually I understand is applicable mostly to self-revisitations, because I kind of hardly imagine upcycling somebody else's choreography, because that would be per se a very violent act of admitting that I know better and I will improve their work. However, when it comes to my own choreography, an upcycling material is exactly how translation acts on the target language. It's actually through the repetition and through reactivation of certain strategies, it actually helps the material to grow, so the material is becoming upcycled in this very way. And of course, this is also a very important way of break out the vicious circle of overproduction, so present in our field, where due to also precarious conditions of artists, everything is about new project, next idea, not enough space to investigate, research, nor share the work with audiences. So recycling and upcycling, it's almost like a kind of a manifesto of a protest against these conditions and the way how to economically rework materials that has been put together with so much efforts. And I mean, you also an artist yourself, you know how many hours we spend often in studios developing materials and how hard it is to let them go just because we need to apply for a new project and bring up a new product into the life.
Wonderful. Yes, Sarah, I will just step in because the time is running, but thank you so much for your answer, Joanna, and for an amazing question, Sarah Wookie, who is, yeah, very well-known transmitter of Yvonne Reiner, right, Trio. But I just wanted also to say, you know, that it's very, very interesting how language allows for certain modalities, how we can, you know, create discourse around certain notions and then again stumble upon certain, you know, terms. And sometimes language obviously is the limitation, but this is why one talks about those issues. And I think, you know, this wonderful presentation by you, Joanna, has brought so many interesting notions to the fore that will be hopefully now further digested. I know many people will be looking forward to watch this recording online. I'm just saying that there is someone, a dear colleague, Ana Paula de Silva. Sorry, Anna, if you are unable to turn on your screen, someone actually who is from the Federal Universidad da Bahia, so could actually perhaps speak also a little bit to the context if we had more time. I'm not quite sure, I don't want to put her on the spot, but just to acknowledge the presence here. But the time is almost done. Hi, Hannah, thank you, Anna says. Yes, but the time actually almost ran out, 2 minutes past, so we are very sharp on time. We are very happy if you have any further questions to forward them to Joanna. Again, she's with us as an artistic collaborator. And just let me very briefly share my screen just to say again, thank you, dear Joanna, for this wonderful lecture, and big bravo to you. Thank you everyone for joining us during this event. Please do stay tuned, subscribe to our newsletters or sign up for our newsletters for our YouTube channel. The recordings will be there, or visit our website. We have a next very interesting event coming up, at the Congress of the Comité International of History of Art in Lyon, with many amazing speakers on relevant topic, right? Performance, conservation, preservation. So please join us there. This will be in person. And other than this, thank you so much for joining us. This is our website, and see you very soon in this space or in person. Bye.